Germany's in trouble, and a huge part of this, as far as I'm concerned, is because of these unbelievably ill-advised energy policies that were hypothetically put in place to aid the planet's movement towards lower climate transformation. And fair enough, maybe we have some concern on that front, but this absurd panicking combined with post hoc central planning and this insane notion that we can somehow make energy more expensive without producing cascading sequences of catastrophes is naive beyond belief and malevolent, at least in part. So now Germany's in trouble because they're hyper-reliant on the Russians. And so now, back to the Dutch farmers. Now, the Dutch government put pressure on the farmers recently because a legislative body that was EU-controlled, that's my understanding, decided in favor of an idiot environmental group, and the court compelled the government, so that's a non-legislative body, by the way, the court compelled the government to act in relation to the farmers. And apparently the farmers have had enough of this.
This is a big topic. As you know, the Dutch farmers are probably the finest and most efficient in the world, right? And practically no Dutch people seem to know that, which is extraordinary. And they don't realize how important their farmers are to the world, as the second largest food exporter in the world.
Yeah, it's a miracle, right? Because how big is Holland? It's a tiny country. You can drive across it in like 3 hours.
Here in Netherlands, there's an information campaign to make the farmers look like bad guys here as well. I mean, these are the new kulaks, right?
In Canada, it was the farmers and the truckers who rose up, the misogynists and the bigots and the racists in our prime minister's terms. And then that's triggered these co-occurring protests in the US and in Holland. And now it isn't easy to get farmers upset either, because those tractors that they bring to the protests, those things are bloody expensive, and most of the farmers don't own them. They have to finance them, and so they're running on very thin margins, 3 to 5% a year generally. And you have to be one canny person to run a big farm in a modern economy. You have to be paying attention to all sorts of unbelievably complicated and sophisticated things. And so when the farmers have been pushed to the point where they're willing to take time away from their farms to spray manure on the government steps, it's probably time to listen. So I agree with you on that front 100%.
Clearly, the WEF, the WEF, they call it WEF here in the Netherlands, the World Economic Forum, is trying to control food supply, right? That is production and distribution, right? And one of the ways to do this is, as Stalin did and Mao did in China, and Stalin did in Ukraine and Russia, is to take the farms away from the traditional farmers and then put your farmers on that land, right? And let's talk about this. If the Dutch farmers, let's take this as a premise, are the most efficient in the world, well, let's just say they're the second most efficient. Why would you knock them out of the saddle to get somebody else to produce the food? Where, Indian farmers? I mean, who's going to produce this food in a much less efficient way that would create even more pollution? This is clearly about control. Also, there's something that you never hear in any press that I've heard in the United States, is the tri-state city. Tri-state city is this smart city that they're proposing to build between the tri-states are Belgium, Netherlands, and Germany. So this mega city, basically, that would take up all this farmland in that area, and which would bring huge amounts of more people into this area, right? So the tri-state city is something you don't hear much about, but that's another part of this plan. There was a fire about maybe 10 days ago. I went to it right after the next morning, and it's at a picnic distribution center, which is, there was an investment, $600 million into this picnic food distribution center from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, coincidentally, and it burned down, right?
It's the same thing happens on the bloody energy front. It's like, well, Australia won't build coal-generating electrical plants, but they'll ship their bloody coal to China, where they're going to build much dirtier plants. And the same thing applies to Canada. If we shut down our energy industry, which our bloody, insane, narcissistic, delusional, traitorous prime minister happens to think is a good idea and seems to be working as hard as he can to manage, all that's going to happen is that we're going to cede the ground to people like Putin, who we also turned into a radical enemy with his hands on the control pump for Europe. I mean, I don't see how we could be stupider here in the West if we actually took courses in stupidity and tried as hard as we could. We seem to be doing everything we can to break everything as rapidly as possible. And then I wonder too, has it got to the point where the people who think you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs, and there's too many people on the planet, think that this is some sort of like needle's eye that we have to go through? all this mass starvation and death so that we end up with a sustainable population. I mean, Jesus Christ, that's a dim and grim scenario. But as you said, why would you take the Dutch farmers out of business when they're so unbelievably hyper-productive and efficient? It's not like there's too much food, especially not if we don't have farmers.
If anything, I would be trying to get a large agricultural institute here in Netherlands to teach other farmers how to be as efficient as Dutch farmers are, replicate these farmers. You know, in Afghanistan, actually, many of the farmers coming over, I was out in the farms quite a lot, were actually Dutch farmers to teach Afghans how to do things better. But the bottom line is, as you can see, I watch you all the time. You know what's happening. There's a huge authoritarian. The desire to have a one world order is clearly strong. And this isn't the first time it's happened. As you know, it's a constant in human behavior. And also, as somebody who studies the human psyche a lot, as you do, you realize pulling these farmers off of their traditional farms unroots them. It cuts their anchor, their boat anchor. They're going to be drifting, culturally, so that makes them much easier to. You can't control farmers well. That's why Stalin wanted to get rid of the farmers. Stalin had to get rid of those farmers because farmers have a mind of their own. Same with Mao. You got to get rid of those farmers because they think for themselves. And likewise here, these Dutch farmers think for themselves. And so they're the bad guys. To me, they're the great guys. These are the people
me
that we
too,
have to
man.
defend. That's our backbone. They are our backbone. That's why I flew to Netherlands from Mexico. I mean, that's how important this is.
Pero claro, también es pensar que estamos solos, esto ya ha pasado, ¿no? A la historia. Ya la gente sigue o cree más, ¿no? En que no estamos solos, ¿no?
Lógicamente, ¿no? Porque la Tierra, el planeta, es un planeta muy primitivo. Tenemos muy pocos años. La raza humana, en comparación con la edad del propio planeta, que son 4.600 millones de años, tenemos 4 minutos de existencia, más o menos. Entonces somos unos bebés, somos muy jovencitos, apenas nos ponemos de pie, como el bebé que se pone de pie en la cuna y empieza a ver que hay más gente a su alrededor. La galaxia donde nosotros vivimos se calcula que puede haber 100.000 millones de soles, con sus cortejos planetarios. Y nuestra galaxia es una de las millones y millones de galaxias que hay en uno de los 7 superuniversos. Es que la creación es tan enorme, tan gigantesca, que por supuesto que hay vida, pero hay vida a millones y millones y millones de planetas habitados.